Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, February 19th, 2024, and today Governor Tony Evers from the state of Wisconsin signed into law brand new state legislative maps for the Wisconsin State Senate and the Wisconsin State Assembly in a major victory for Democrats after the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled their state voting maps unconstitutional. Now, for a bit of background on the state of Wisconsin, if you know politics, you know Wisconsin is a battleground state. President Biden only won the state by 0.6% in the last election, and President Trump won it in 2016 by 0.7%. And so for elections, this state has swayed back and forth between Democratic governors and Republican governors, Democratic senators and Republican senators, and of course on the presidential level. But in the state assembly and in the state senate, the map actually hasn't shifted too much because Republicans have ultimately gerrymandered this state into oblivion, giving them an undeniable majority election after election. And that all changed when the Wisconsin Supreme Court decided that these maps were just simply unconstitutional. Wisconsin has a law written in against gerrymandering, and thus they found that the state legislature did in fact violate it. And as I was saying, this is a major victory for Democrats because I showed you that although this state is close, you may now realize that Wisconsin ultimately is a red state when it comes down to partisan makeup. In the Wisconsin State Senate elections back in 2022, Republicans expanded their majority to 2/3 over the Democrats, with 22 seats after this election and just 11 for the Democratic Party. When it came down to the state assembly elections, the numbers are also equally as bad for Democrats. In 2022, Republicans won 64 out of the 99 seats here. Democrats won just 35. And so Republicans have enjoyed such a large advantage for quite some time now. But you might be looking at this popular vote and saying, okay, if Republicans are winning by nearly 10 points across the state, sure, 64 to 35 isn't proportionate, but maybe it explains it a little bit more. But I would ask you to look no further than the true and ultimate egregious example of how this gerrymander has been made to keep Republicans in this ultimate, extremely high point of a majority in the Wisconsin State Assembly that ultimately led to these maps' demise, which is the 2018 Wisconsin State Assembly elections. In this election, the Democratic Party won the popular vote in a 7 to 8 point swing from 2016, with 53% of the vote to the Republican Party's 45%. An 8-point advantage in the popular vote resulted in Republicans with 63 out of the 99 seats. Yes, you heard that correctly. Democrats got just a little bit over 1/3 of the seats despite winning over a majority of the vote statewide. And so from here, it was clear that the gerrymander in place in the state of Wisconsin was so exceptionally effective that it would require not a redraw, but a complete striking down of this map, not allowing the Republican legislature to take it up in totality, but instead intervening in the only place Democrats know can supersede the state legislature, thus checks and balances, which was the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. And so in the 2020 election, yes, we're going back to 2020, Democrats ran a candidate in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, held in April of 2020 amidst the start of the pandemic, in which Democrats won with a liberal justice here with 55% of the vote. Now, this was a seat that was, chosen by Governor Scott Walker. He originally had appointed Daniel Kelly to be serving in this seat back in 2016, but of course, there has to be an election. That's what Wisconsin law declares. And because Daniel Kelly was seen as a more conservative type of justice, somebody who was in opposition to some of the fundamental values of some of these Wisconsin voters, they turned out against him. Even in the time of the pandemic, they voted by mail. They voted in person. They voted to put Jill Karfowski in the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. And so this was the start of the turning of the tides here in Wisconsin. Daniel Kelly was a conservative who was pushed out of this race and lost his justice position in the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. And thus, the ideological boundaries were narrowed down to just one advantage for conservatives over liberals. And so Democrats knew that with this court case, they would need time to strike. They wouldn't be able to do it in 2022 because the Supreme Court in Wisconsin had been so conservative that they knew there was no possibility that they were going to be able to overturn these maps. But then came another Wisconsin State Supreme Court election, one that ended up favorably for the Democratic Party again. Janet Protewitz defeated none other than the repeat candidate, former Justice, Daniel Kelly in this state. Janet Protewitz won with 55.5% of the vote in 2023, less than a year after the Dobbs leak and the Dobbs decision, and Janet Protewitz ended up winning with an exceptionally large margin that gave Democrats hope going into the 2023 off-year elections and, of course, the 2024 presidential election. And so when Democrats won this seat, it flipped the ideological majority of the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. Janet Protewitz essentially gave Democrats the green flag that they could now push up these state legislative maps, a number of other issues like abortion across the state, and that the liberal justices would side in their favor. And so instead of trying to draw the maps a little bit more fairly, maybe to temper the court, the Wisconsin Republican legislature, again with this exceptionally large majority that did have the numbers at the time, argued that they were going to impeach Janet Protewitz, to remove her from this position and to not allow the court to rule on this case. But then backlash was insane. You saw national news media talking about this, branding the Republican Party as undemocratic, trying to remove someone who was just elected solely because they believed that she was going to rule poorly on these cases, at least in their eyes, poorly meant against the Republican Party. And while they were right that Janet Protewitz, in no reality, was going to side with the GOP on this front, they simply didn't realize that there would be so much backlash across the country and across the state of Wisconsin that might have even lost the majority themselves, regardless of what she decided to do. But they backed down. All the backlash clearly worked, and the top GOP leaders realized that maybe even their seats would be threatened, and Donald Trump's chances would be threatened in 2024 if they did follow through on impeaching her in this state. And so when the decision was struck down in December that these maps needed to be completely gone and new maps needed to be redrawn in time for 2024, Democrats were a little bit cautiously optimistic as to how I would put it. Because although the map here is gerrymandered in favor of the GOP, depending on who's drawing the map, the same type of thing could happen, and the state Supreme Court might have to follow through on some of these maps. But Democrats really lucked out. Instead of a map that was 64-35, Republican over Democrat, as decided by the last election, the new map here gives Democrats 49 seats and Republicans 50 based on the 2020 presidential election, meaning that although Joe Biden did win the state, Donald Trump districts would outnumber Biden districts by just 1 instead of 64-35. And so at a bare minimum, Democrats are going to be picking up at least 10 seats across the state assembly. Now, state assembly elections are held every 2 years, just similar to the House of Representatives. They are up again this election cycle, but the numbers get a lot better for Democrats in the Wisconsin State Senate. Again, remember, Joe Biden did win this state, but very narrowly. The new Senate maps that were just approved and signed into law by the Wisconsin governor there, Tony Evers, you find here that Joe Biden won 18 districts here to Donald Trump's 15, meaning that out of the 33 districts in the state of Wisconsin, Democrats already have more than the majority of the districts. Keep in mind their numbers today are 22-11. Now, the lasting impacts of this new map in Wisconsin in the Senate races will come in due time. Every 2 years, there's a section of Senate seats up very similar to what we see in the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, nearly mimicking that. And so you find that although maybe Democrats have the advantage now, it'll probably be 4 to 6 years before you actually see them reclaiming that majority, assuming that they do well in these midterm and presidential elections. But I think regardless of that, the fact is the Wisconsin State Supreme Court here is partisan in favor of Democrats. The state legislative maps have now been redrawn in a major victory for Democrats as well. Governor Tony Evers, who had his election in 2022, we can actually take a look at the Wisconsin election there because it was very interesting when you see that Republicans were expecting to win that governorship there, that maybe they would be able to maintain a trifecta across the state. The polls had indicated that Tim Michels, the Republican nominee here, was going to be the victor in this Wisconsin race. Tony Evers ultimately pulled ahead. And now there are no term limits in the state of Wisconsin. Tony Evers theoretically could decide to run for a third term. He has publicly expressed interest, and there are now a lot of calls from a lot of the Democrats in Wisconsin that are very pleased with the way that this map is going around and going and changing from the last election, that they want him to run for a third term. And so what you see here is that Democrats could actually be building up the possibility of an electoral trifecta in the state of Wisconsin. I mean, if Joe Biden wins the state of Wisconsin by a larger margin in 2024 than he did in 2020, what's to say the state legislature wouldn't flip? I mean, take a look at some of these districts here. For instance, you're taking a look at District 91 or other districts across the state where there simply are Republican advantages based on the rest of the country. This one, I think, would be the perfect example for what I'm about to point out. Donald Trump won this district in 2020 by 1.1%. What if Biden wins the state instead of 0.6 by 2.6? A uniform swing, which sure might be seemingly impractical, but entertain it for a moment. If the state swings by just 2 points, the state legislature, already one chamber, automatically flips. And then if Tony Evers brings Democrats with his coattails to victories in 24 and then runs again in 26, and then they maintain that in a presidential election, which is not too far off given the bench that we're looking at for 2028, people like Josh Shapiro, people like Gretchen Whitmer who know how to win in states like these, who could very well be at the top of the ticket or the bottom of the ticket, regardless, would bring a lot to the ticket. You could find that Democrats reasonably by the end of the decade could establish a clear-cut majority in both the state Senate of Wisconsin and the state assembly. And that would be a very, very long time coming for Democrats in this state, because Republicans have maintained this advantage for quite a long time. When you take a look at where they were in years past, 2016 instance, when Donald Trump won the state by 0.7, remember, Joe Biden won by 0.6, the numbers were, guess what? Identical. Isn't that something? It's almost as if these maps were made to withstand this type of a close election at the top of the ticket. And so what you see here too, 2018, I think really put things into perspective for me. That no matter how hard Democrats tried under the old maps, they simply were not going to win. But now it's 1,000% within reach and honestly quite probable at this point. Because what happened with Janet Protewitz and the Wisconsin Supreme Court here was a rejection of the identities that Republicans held when it came down to issues of abortion, issues of, in air quotes, election integrity. The way the Republicans campaign and govern in the state of Wisconsin does not land right with the average voter. And I could even see a reality in which Donald Trump wins the state of Wisconsin and Democrats make massive gains in the state legislature because the new map that has been put forth is made to do just that. This is an equalizer map. It's not as democratic as Democrats might have hoped for, but it is certainly all that they could have ever asked for. The Wisconsin State Supreme Court's actions and abilities to rule on this map are limited. The Republican legislature also seems to be disarming, and they did disarm, allowing this map to easily go to Tony Evers. And while there were people who were very upset by this, I'm sure the Wisconsin State Senate is not pleased. Because this map is so close, it does mean that Republicans still do have a narrow but certain advantage. I just showed you that this is the 2020 presidential map here, and Donald Trump still wins the majority of districts. It's a one-seat advantage, but it means if Donald Trump does win the seat by 3 to 4 points, maybe 5 or 6, as some are predicting, that the map could be a lot more lopsided in favor of the GOP. And that's right. And Democrats will still be fighting an uphill battle when it comes down to winning in this state, because if they win the popular vote across the state, they could still lose the state assembly. But nothing, and I mean it, nothing, comes as worse or as bad as it was in the past decade for Democrats in Wisconsin. This is a major victory for Democrats no matter how you cut the cake. Because I think what we will see is that, again, by the end of the decade, maybe even by the end of 2024, Democrats will have an upper hand in the state of Wisconsin, in a state where they were never even given the chance to have equal levels of support or equal levels of representation in this battleground state. Though I will say, a lot of it will depend ultimately on the Biden v. Trump rematch that we are gearing up for this November. Both Democrats and Republicans are hopeful that their parties do well in this state, but clearly there are a lot more implications than just the presidential when it comes down to states like Wisconsin, as I am sure many others across the nation. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.